So first, you have to experience a setback, and then you can have a comeback. And that's the problem with comebacks, isn't it? Right? The problem with comebacks is that you can't really have a comeback unless you first experience a setback. And not only can you not have a comeback unless you first experience a setback, but the greater the comeback story, the greater the setback that you experienced that led to the comeback. And you guys are smart. I'm sure you guys have already figured this out. But I think it's so interesting how if you zoom out and look at it, almost all of our favorite movies that we love can be summed up in that basic premise of first, you experience a setback, and then you have a comeback. The end. I just ruined all of your favorite movies right there. That's it. That's it. It doesn't matter what genre it is. It doesn't matter if it's an action movie or sci-fi or cartoon. They all follow the exact same premise. First, you experience a setback, and then, and only then, can you have a comeback. For example, does anybody remember the one about the sister who accidentally set off an eternal winter everywhere and nobody knew what to do until, the theologian who loved warm hugs reminded them of the prophecy that only an act of true love can thaw a frozen heart? Anybody remember that? Anybody remember that? And I'm talking about, do you remember how many setbacks the sister and the entire city of Arendelle had to endure before they were able to experience their comeback? How about this one? Anybody remember the one, the tiny heroes with the hairy feet, and they had to trek up barefoot a fiery mountain to get rid of a wedding band that was cursed? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Remember how Frodo and his friends had to endure setback after setback after setback, and 9 hours later, they finally had their comeback. And maybe you don't like Disney, you don't like fiction or movie. How about this one? I love this one, okay? Anybody remember the one about the four friends who did not know what to do because right before they're about to go their separate ways for the summer, they went to a thrift store and they found a pair of denim pants that fit them all perfectly, even though they were all different shapes and sizes? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Talk about a setback. So I was like, I'd never heard of that one. Look it up when you get home. Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. Amazing movie. And if you think those stories are great, man, wait till you hear the one that we're going to look at today about the teenage boy who was left for dead in a hole by the people who were supposed to take care of him. Genesis chapter 37 is our anchor text for today. Do you guys still bring your Bibles to church? I sure hope so, because that's a thing. And if you're new, no biggie. If you can go to the Connect counter, we have free Bibles to pass out if you don't have a Bible over there. But we're just glad that you are in the house. If you're new to the Bible, it should be easy this morning. Genesis is the first book in the Bible. So just go table of contents, and then you can get to the book of Genesis. We're going to be in chapter 37. Before we read it, I just want to set the stage and give you a little bit of context to what is going on. Genesis chapter 7 tells the story of a guy named Jacob, and Jacob has 12 sons with multiple wives. And before you ask, the answer is yes. There was a lot of beef between all the sons and all of their baby mamas, okay? It was intense. And just so you don't think I'm overstating it, I want you to watch how fast the chaos unfolds in the story. So again, remember, we're talking about a guy named Jacob. He's got 12 sons, and here's what the writer has to say. It's going to be up on the screen if you don't have a Bible with you. The writer says in verse 1, it says, "Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed. It's the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph is going to be a central character in our story today. Was a young man of 17. All right, everybody say 17. That's important to our context. Man, you guys are very responsive for 9 a.m. I love it. Keep that same energy the whole time because I'm excited to preach today. He was tending flocks with his brothers, the son of Bilhah and the son of Zilpah, his father's wives. And then Joseph brought to their father a bad report about his brothers. I'm not going to say who because I don't want anybody to really know. It's none of your business, really. But one of my girls loves to tattle. Like, loves it. Like, we walk in the door, and it's the first thing that she does, okay? And I got to be honest, you guys, I don't know how to feel about it as a parent. I really don't. Because on the one hand, I love knowing that I have an undercover informant who will spill the tea on everything. But on the other hand, I kind of want her to be loyal to the sister squad. You know, I'm like, come on, girl, like, snitches get stitches, okay? I'm like, you gotta, you know, it's kind of, and I don't know, you know, we don't know if Joseph's father loved that Joseph was snitching on his brothers. But what's clear from the text is that Jacob did not make it easy for Joseph's brothers to care about him. Listen to what he says. Now Israel here is another word for Jacob, so we're talking about the same guy. He says, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in an old age. Quick little poll in the room. How many of you in the room, contrary to what your parents have said, have suspected that they may have favorites? Just show of hands real quick. You're like, I know they get, look at all, wow, that's more than I expected, right? Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if you thought you were the favorite, because nobody likes that, okay? That's annoying, all right? And we got some siblings in the room, so I don't want to cause any kind of family drama later when you guys are having lunch at Applebee's. But can you imagine, though? All right, just for a second, I want you to imagine what it was like to have a father who was not subtle at all about who his favorite child was. Like, just imagine that. Okay, and I don't know if this is exactly how it played out, but can you imagine how awkward do you think that family dinner was? Like look at what the writer says, okay? He says he loved him more than any of his other sons, and then he says this, he made him an ornate robe just for him, okay? Just imagine how awkward that was. I imagine they were all sitting at dinner, you know, just having a nice quiet dinner, and all of a sudden Jacob gets up and he pulls out a giant gift box from the van, and they're like, what is going on? And he walks all the way to Joseph, and he's like, hey man, I know it's not your birthday, and I know it's not Christmas. I was driving by the mall, and I saw, you know, outside there, and it was one of a kind, amazing Technicolor dream coat, and I just knew I just had to get it for you. And so he opens the box. He's like, I got this coat just for you because I wanted to remind you that I love you more than all my other sons. Can you imagine being there, sitting there, looking around like, what is going on in here? And we laugh, but here's the crazy thing. You keep reading the text and you find that this is actually not that funny, because it says in the very, very next verse that when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, because he wasn't even trying to hide it. Listen to this. They hated him, and they couldn't even speak a kind word to him. But wait, it gets worse than that. Verse 5 says this. Verse 5 says that Joseph had a dream. And when he told his dream to his brothers, watch this, they hated him all the more. That is twice now in 2 verses that the writer has used the word hate to describe how the brothers felt about their youngest brother. Okay, and just so you don't think the writer is overstating how much they hated their baby brother, I want you to watch what happens 10 verses later when Jacob sends Joseph to go check on his brother. So all the brothers are out in the field, they're working. The father calls Joseph in, and he's like, I want you to go check on your brothers, probably because Joseph's a good snitch, and he'll tell him what's really going on. And so he sends him, and watch what happens. If you have a Bible, we're going to just fast forward a little bit down here to verse 18, okay? Listen to what the writer says. He says, but when they saw him in a distance, right, and they here is referring to his brothers. So when all the brothers saw Joseph coming in a distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. I'm like, can we give him a wedgie or something? Like, can we take his stuff? Listen, they are plotting to kill their 17-year-old baby brother. That's how much they hated him. He's coming towards them, and they're like, this is our chance. Listen to this conversation. Okay, here comes the dreamer, they said to one another. There he is, Mr. Big Dreams. There he is. Come now, they said, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns. A cistern was a hole they dug in the ground to store water. And they came up with this plan. They said, we're going to kill him. We're going to throw it in there. And then we're going to tell everybody that a ferocious animal devoured him. And then he says, we will see what comes of his dreams. When Reuben was one of the brothers, heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands, right? I mean, there's always one reasonable person in the whole group, right? Everyone else is like, kill him, kill him. Reuben's like, okay. That escalated quickly. He's like, let's not take his life. I got a better idea. Let's not shed any blood. Let's throw him, Reuben says, in the cistern, in the wilderness. Let's not lay a hand on him. And Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. Now, we don't know if Reuben was doing this because he cared about Joseph or because he was trying to score brownie points with his father, but Reuben gave them an out. And then the writer says this. It says that when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe. I bet they couldn't wait to take that stinking Technicolor dream coat off his back that he's been wearing nonstop to prove that his father loved him more than everybody else. They took the robe off, and then they took him, and they threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. And then they sat down, the writer says, to eat their meal. They looked up, and they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices and balm and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? So now they're thinking about what's in it for us, right? They're like, he's going to get out easy. Okay, I got a better idea. And Judah says this, come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let's not lay our hands on him after all, because he's our brother, our own flesh and blood. And all his brothers agreed. I want to read you this part again because it just jumped out at me this week. It says, after they threw him in there, did you listen to what it says? It says they sat down. What did they sit down to do? To eat their meal. Listen, if that doesn't send chills up your spine, you may want to do one of these. Make sure you're still with us. That may be the coldest verse in the Bible. And I know we read this thing like it's fiction, but this happened. And I want you to just imagine how cold it was that they not only jumped their little brother, they threw him in a hole and left him for dead. And they sat and ate a pizza. Okay, and I don't know if Joseph could hear them. I don't know if he was in the hole, half naked, bloody, and he could hear his brothers laughing, eating above the hole, right, talking about where they were going to. I don't know if he could hear them. If he could hear them, I wonder what was going through his mind. And if he couldn't hear them, I wonder if he thought that maybe they changed their minds when they decided to pull him out of the hole, only to find out that they had all decided together that they were going to sell him, right? And so they pull him out of the hole. And he says this in verse 28. When the Midianite merchants came back, his brothers pulled him out of the cistern, and they sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. No offense if you're familiar with this story and you know it like the back of your hand and you know how it's going to end. But I just have to say that if you don't know this story, or maybe you've never read it before, or maybe you haven't read it in a long time, maybe you don't know how it ends, I envy you. Okay, for real. Like if you're new to church and you're like, I don't know where this is going, I envy you because I wish I could see this story with fresh eyes for the first time. I envy you because I wish I didn't know that this story still had way more twists and turns than a cheap garden hose. I wish that I didn't know how the story was going to end, because I think a lot of us has let familiarity rob us of the tension that is in the text. Watch what happens after his brother sold him off. Okay, this wasn't like fantasy football, like, oh, we traded him and I'm going to trade him back. No. They sold their brother off as a slave. They didn't know what was going to happen to him, and that was the plan. Bye-bye. See you later. We're going to tell Papa that some animal or whatever devoured you. Imagine what it's like to be 17 and your own brothers jumped you, assaulted you, and now they just sold you into slavery. Listen to what the writer says. Fast forward with me if you have a Bible. A couple chapters later, when the story picks up in Genesis chapter 39. Here's what it says. It says, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, because that's where the merchants were going that bought him. Now, Potiphar was an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials. He was the captain of the guard. And so he bought him from the Ishmaelites who were taking him there. And so now Joseph has been sold how many times? Twice. And listen to what the writer says in the next verse. It says, the Lord was with Joseph. And everybody said, no, he wasn't. I'm serious. Jumped, assaulted, robbed, thrown in a hole, pulled out, sold into slavery, sold again into slavery. And the writer's like, hey, just so you know, the Lord was with Joseph. And I'm like, wait, what? What? The guy is in a place that he didn't want to be, with people he didn't want to be with, punching in the clock for a job that he wasn't getting paid for. And yet, the writer has the audacity to suggest that the Lord was with Joseph. I'm sorry, but that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense that your conclusion of someone who's just experienced everything we've just described is, well, obviously the Lord was with him. Right? That was the commentary. It's like, wow, God really likes this guy. Right? That doesn't, and if you don't feel the tension in the story, if reading that doesn't make you feel a certain kind of way, like how can the author say that God was with him? It's probably because you know how the story ends, right? You know, in chapter 50 and everything, happily ever after. But listen, guys, you have to remember that Joseph didn't know about Genesis chapter 50 in Genesis chapter 39. Right? Joseph wasn't sitting there going, oh, this is going to be great, man. Just give me 11 more chapters. It's going to be awesome. No, he didn't know. Okay, he didn't know how the story was going to unfold. Okay, as far as Joseph could tell, his life and every dream he had ever had was over. But don't tell that to the writer, because he not only believed that God was with Joseph, but the writer claims that God's presence and favor was so unmistakably with Joseph that even his pagan master noticed. Watch what it says in the very next verse. It says that the Lord was with Joseph so that he what? He prospered. So he says, okay, number one, God was with him in the house of his Egyptian master. And then he says this. It says, when his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that God gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household. He entrusted everything to his care that he owned. From the time he put him in charge of the household and of all that he owned, the writer says that the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. This is a completely different sermon that's not even in my notes. But isn't it just like God to decide that he's going to bless people who don't even know him or love him by proxy, that they're close to people that love him? Isn't that kind of crazy? You're like, what? Potiphar don't care about God. He just wants his business to go well. And God's like, well, lucky for you, Joseph works for you. So I'm going to bless you because you're in proximity with him. The blessing of the Lord was on everything that Potiphar did, both in the house and in the field. And so Potiphar, he's a smart guy. He's like, all right, obviously, anytime this dude's around, things are going really well for me. And so here's what he did. He left everything in Joseph's care. This is hilarious to me. With Joseph in charge, he didn't concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. Isn't that great? It's like, I'm a little picky about what I eat, Joseph. You're good, but you're not that good. Everything else. Does anybody remember how old Joseph was when he was sold into slavery? 17. Okay, come on now. Is anybody 17 in here, by the way? Around 17? Okay, we got a 17-year-old right here. All right, I love how he didn't raise his hand and you're like, he's 17, he's right there. I love it. That's the thing about church. Someone's always going to out you. You might as well just raise your hand. He is 17. And an Egyptian captain entrusted all of his estate to him as a teenager. I don't know what you were doing when you were 17. Not that. My greatest accomplishment, I was thinking about it when I was 17, I think, was memorizing all the lyrics to Gangsta's Paradise on a cassette tape. Some of you don't know how impressive that is. Because we have internet now. My kids are like, Alexa, what are they saying? I'm like, no. Anybody remember what I'm talking about back in the day? The only way to know the lyrics of the song is, first of all, you have to wait till they played it on the radio, and then you have to record it on the cassette, and then you have to play it later, and then you have to pause and write it down. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Come on. Some of you are like, what does that have to do with the sermon? Absolutely nothing, okay? But it was impressive. As I walked through the valley of the, like literally it took forever. That's what I did when I was 17. I was proud of myself. Like, I can rap Gangsta's Paradise. Let's go. 17. And Potiphar is like, hey, I'm gonna entrust everything to your care. And I don't know about you, but I love that the writer wants us to know that Joseph wasn't just really, really hardworking. I love that he just wants us to know that he was also really good looking. Did you guys see that in the next verse? It says, now Joseph was well built and handsome. Yeah. Message paraphrase said, now Joseph was swole and buff. Just kidding, doesn't say that. Some of you are like, wow, I should read that paraphrase version. You gotta love the Bible. Hey, he was real good looking. I just need to just kind of slide that in there, all right? Now, if you know the story, you know that it doesn't end well for Joseph, right? And I wish we had time to read the whole text, but I'm just going to skim over it real quick. But Joseph's real good looking, and what ends up happening, right? Potiphar's wife is now eyeing Joseph like, oh man, my man, that boy fine, you know? And she's like, okay. And the very next verse, why are you laughing? It says that right there. Listen, it says, after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joe. And she's like, yo, man, come to bed with me, you know? And Joseph refused. And long story short, she ends up framing him for assault. She lied on him. The master came back and she kind of turned the whole thing on Joseph. And the master had no choice but to send Joseph to prison. This was like his right-hand man. This was the guy that was in charge of everything. And because she lied on Joseph, the master threw Joseph in prison. Talk about 1 step forward and 10 steps back. And you guys are not going to believe what the writer says about Joseph when his master threw him into prison. Fast forward down with me again, just several verses to verse 20. Listen to what it says. It says, now Joseph's master took him and put him in prison. And the reason he did that is because his wife lied on him. The place where the king's prisoners were confined. And it says, but while Joseph was there, here it is again, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness. He granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden, so that the warden put Joseph in charge of all those that were held in prison. And he was made responsible for all that was there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because, here it is again, the Lord was with Joseph. And God gave him success in whatever he did. I don't know if you guys are keeping count, but that is 4 times now in the midst of all of his setbacks that the writer wants us to know that the Lord was with Joseph. And I promise you, I'm not trying to be irreverent to God's word when I say this, but I find this whole section of the story just a little bit annoying. Can I admit that out loud? Like this whole chunk that we just read, I think is a little bit annoying. I think it's a little bit annoying that the writer is trying to build a case that God was with Joseph by pointing to the fact that God blessed him while he was a slave in a foreign land. And maybe it's just me and I need to be a little bit more spiritual than I am. But you know what I think is a greater evidence or a better evidence that God is with you? Not being a slave in a foreign land. Anybody with me on that? Right? I mean, come on now, SFM. Tell me I'm not the only one who thinks that not experiencing all of the setbacks that Joseph experienced is actually a much more favorable way for God to let him know that God was with him, as opposed to God saying, no. You're going to have all those setbacks, and I'm going to bless you in the midst of the setbacks. And I'm like, can we just take the setbacks part out? Like, if you just like me that much, can you just make sure that none of this really happened? That would really prove to me that you're with me and that you love me. And God was like, no. You're going to be in the midst of it, and I'm going to bless you in the midst of it. It doesn't make any sense that the writer keeps saying over and over and over again that the Lord was with Joseph, even though his life was falling apart. It doesn't make any sense. Unless, of course, that was the point. Unless God was trying to show Joseph and God was trying to show you and I that he does some of his best work in some of our worst moments in life. And I don't know who first said this, or I will give him credit, but it has been said that for those who trust God, A setback is nothing more than a setup for a comeback. Oh, come on now, church. That'll preach. For those who trust God, every setback is nothing more than a setup for a comeback. And before you roll your eyes because you think that sounds like something you'd read in a fortune cookie, can I show you what this looked like in the life of this 17-year-old boy who kept experiencing setback after setback after setback after setback? Can I show you how it played out in his life? Fast forward with me again to chapter 41, just a couple of chapters over, okay? And by the way, just to throw this out there, if you've never read this whole story and you haven't read it in a while, can you please read the whole thing when you get home? Can we do that? I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but binge the whole story when you get home. It is so good. I promise you that you will appreciate how the story ends more if you read the entire thing. Go to Genesis chapter 37. It'll take you less than an hour, okay? If you don't want to read it, have the British guy on the U Version Bible read it to you, okay? Chapter 37 to chapter 50. It is amazing. It'll blow your mind what Joseph had to go through. But just to catch you up to speed before we read what happens here in Genesis chapter 41, okay? So Joseph's in prison, right? You guys remember that? They throw him in prison, and he's doing well in prison. You know, the prison warden's like, I don't got to worry about nothing, you know? And while Joseph's in prison, one of the king's prisoners has a dream, right? And Joseph's the dreamer. He has a dream. He's like, I don't know what this dream is about. And Joseph's like, well, my God actually gave me a gift, and he tells me how to interpret dreams. And so Joseph interprets the dream for this guy who is in prison. And this guy was like, yo, man, wow, God's obviously with you. He's like, here's what I promise you, when I get out, man, when I get out the joint, man, I'm gonna remember you. I'm gonna tell the king about you. Anybody know how this one goes? What happens when he goes out? Completely forgets. Doesn't call Joseph back. Doesn't return any of his collect calls. Joseph is just there in prison. Yet another setback. Long story short, the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, now has a dream. And he's asking all of his, all the people around him if they can interpret the dream. And none of the people who were around the king could interpret the dream. And all of a sudden, the guy who was in prison with Joseph who interpreted the dream. Are you guys following this, by the way? This is why you got to read it at home. I know it's a lot of context. But he remembers. And so he goes to the king. And he's like, yo, there's a guy who is in your prison. I don't know if you know this or not, but this guy actually can interpret dreams. Okay, he can help you out. And so the king's like, go get him for me. And so Joseph comes, and Joseph interprets the dream for the king of Egypt. The king called him up from a prison cell, and he came to the palace, probably in chains. He interprets the dream, and the king is so blown away by Joseph's wisdom and by the way the Spirit of God was working through him that he did the unthinkable. Listen to what the king, the Pharaoh, said to Joseph. Chapter 41, verse 39. The Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made known all this to you, this was his dream, by the way, there's no one so discerning and wise as you. So here's what I'm going to do. You will be in charge of my palace, and all my people are going to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. And so Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took, thank you, his signet ring from his finger, and he put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen, #drip. And then he put a gold chain around his neck. And then he had him ride in a chariot as his what? Second in command. And the people shouted before him. Who's him? Joseph. Make way. Thus, he put him in charge of that. Just in case you missed it the first time, right? It's like, he put him in charge of what? The whole, this is cray-cray. This is crazy. I know y'all have heard this story before, but this is crazy. What is crazy? Great question. Glad you asked. It is crazy that in an instant, Joseph just went from prison to palace. It is crazy that 1 or 2 chapters earlier, Joseph is a felon with chains on his hands. And now He's looking like Flavor Flav with a gold chain around its neck. It makes no sense at all when you look at the story. That God decided that the people who would have spit on Joseph 2 chapters earlier are now shouting, make way for Joseph. It makes no sense that God would do something so crazy through Joseph's setbacks that even Joseph the dreamer could not have dreamed anything like this. This text is completely crazy, you guys, especially when you consider that God used Joseph's setbacks to prepare him for his comeback. Oh, come on now, fam. That's so good. And I don't know if you caught it. But listen, this is amazing. Everything that Joseph learned in prison was what God used to prepare him for his time in the palace. Did you catch that? Everything he learned while he was a slave, everything he picked up while he was in Potiphar's house, you know, and he wasn't doing what he wanted to do. He was doing what his master told him to do. And when they threw him in prison, he didn't have the freedom that he hoped for, but he did whatever the warden told him to do. But what Joseph didn't realize is that everything that he was doing in the midst of his setback, God was using to actually prepare him for the skills that he was gonna need when it was time for his comeback. And I don't know who this is for, but is it possible that God is doing the same thing in your life? Is it? I'm just asking. Don't be mad at me. I'm just a messenger. I'm just asking. Is it possible that some of us have been asking God to take us out of a setback that God wants to use to prepare us for our comeback? Is it possible that there are some things that some of us are resisting in this season? And God is saying, yo, those are the things that I'm going to use to raise you up for the next season. Is it possible that God is saying it is within your worst that I am going to do my best work? Is it possible that the things that you despise right now are actually the things that God is going to use to develop you into the person that you need to be to do what he created you to do? Is it possible? Okay, and maybe some of you are not convinced with what I'm talking about, okay? So let me show you. Let me show you. Can I prove it to you? Can I prove it? Can I show you how I know that God will use the things you despise if you let him to develop you and prepare you for the next season? Quick show of hands around the room, okay? And really, I'm not just asking, like really. Show of hands around the room and keep them up for just a little bit. If the greatest season of your spiritual growth also somehow coincides with one of the hardest seasons of your life. Anybody? Keep it, okay, just keep that hand up for just a second. Everybody look around. Okay, look at the receipts. Right? How many of you in the room would say, hey, my greatest testimony came out of one of the worst seasons of my life? Look around the room at what is possible in the midst of your setbacks. You can put your hands down. I just wanted you guys to see that this isn't just like some random text in the Bible. No, this is God saying to you that I'm going to use your setback if you let me to develop you and to transform you. I'm not saying that God caused whatever happened to you, but I'm saying that God can redeem it if you left him. He can redeem it. He can redeem it. He can redeem it. God used what Joseph had to go through in prison to prepare him for his time in the palace. Here's how the whole thing kind of played out in my head. I was digging into the text and I just wanted to make it practical. I'm like, what does this look like for us to live this out today? And admittedly, I may have had a little bit too much fun with the wordplay, but here's kind of how the whole thing played out in my head. Okay, this is kind of the quote. This is kind of the challenge that I have for us today, okay? Here's the challenge for you. When you experience a setback, don't stop doing everything that God has given you favor to do. Because with God, every setback is actually a step up and a setup for a comeback. I'm going to read it one more time because I know that's a mouthful. When you experience a setback in your life, it's important for you to remember that you cannot stop doing everything that God has given you favor to do. And here's why you can't stop. You can't stop because with God, every setback that you experience is actually a step up, and it is a setup for a comeback that God is orchestrating in your life. Let me show you where I got this from, the text, real quick, okay? And go back with me. You don't have to turn there. I had our fine tech team help kind of shrink this into one slide. But listen to what the writer says. Hopefully you caught this earlier. But listen again to what it says while Joseph was a slave. Okay, and just real quick, I probably should have said this earlier, but you know what Joseph couldn't do when he was a slave? He couldn't do anything he wanted to do, right? Like there was a lot he couldn't do. Couldn't go home, couldn't see his dad, couldn't hang out with his friends, couldn't go play, disc golf with his buddies, couldn't pursue his dreams, couldn't finish high school, the high school that he grew up in. There was a lot of things that Joseph couldn't do because of the setbacks he experienced. But I want you to listen to what Joseph did do. It says again, we read it earlier, the Lord was with Joseph, so he prospered in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord gave him success in everything he did. Go to the other part of the chapter when Joseph is now in prison. Listen to what happens. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in what? Whatever he did. Question, what did Joseph do when he was in a season of life when he couldn't do what he wanted to do? He did everything he could do. Did you catch that? When Joseph couldn't do everything he wanted to do, he did everything he could do. The implication being, Joseph did not let his setback put him in a corner. It's what I would have done. I would have sat in the corner of that prison sucking my thumb. Like I ain't helping nobody. Last time I helped somebody, it didn't work out for me. Last time I helped Potiphar, look what happened. His wife lied on me and now I'm in prison. I'm just going to stay on. I am doing nothing. Joseph went to prison. And he just kept doing everything that God gave him favor to do. Joseph, don't miss this, did not let his setback stop him from doing everything that God gave him favor to do. In other words, he didn't let his setback stop him from showing up. He didn't let it stop him from being faithful. He didn't let him stop him from being a person of character. He didn't let it stop him from being a person of integrity. When Potiphar's wife came to Joseph and was like, come to bed with me, if anybody could have justified deserving a break, it was Joseph. Joseph could have easily said, you know what? It's about time I get mine. But Joseph never let his setback stop him from doing everything that God put in front of him. And because Joseph never let his setback stop him from doing everything God gave him favor for, watch what happened. God not only used his setback to prepare him for his comeback, but God used it as a step up in his life. When you experience a setback, don't stop doing everything God has given you favor to do. Can I give you an example of what this looked like in my life recently? Yeah. Right, we're celebrating SE's 8 today. About a month ago, I got home after preaching 2 sermons. Same thing happens. I feel like every Sunday now this year, my wife and I, literally, I preach 2 sermons, do everything here. I go home, the kids are in their rest time, and my wife and I stand in the kitchen for a few minutes, and we just talk about Sunday. And we're just like, wow, that was crazy. Yeah, that was crazy. And this particular Sunday, I don't know if it was a baptism Sunday or whatever. This is a true story. We literally stood in our kitchen and none of us could say a word. Like we were just like jaw to the ground, like, what is God doing? Like I was just like, and she's like, I'm like, I don't. She's like, what's happening at a church? I'm like, I don't know. Blown away. And any married person here probably knows what I'm about to say next, maybe not. But you ever have your spouse say something to you, and then you're not sure if it's a compliment or an insult? You know what I'm talking about? You're like, I don't know how to take that. We're standing in our kitchen. We're like, what is God doing? And then my wife says this. She says, well, we know it's not you. And I was like, I mean, listen. It's true. I've told a lot of people. When I tell people what's going on in our church, like I was on the road the other day, I'm telling people about our church, and they're like, wow, 29 Baptist. It's like, what happened? I'm like, are you doing something? Like, it's not. So I know it's not. I just didn't know how to take it. She's like, We know it's not you. And then she said this, and this was my favorite part of what she said. We know it's not you, ... And she said this. She said, I don't know why this. She said, because you've been doing the same thing for 15 years. You're not doing anything different. You've just been doing the same thing you've been doing. And I didn't really know how to, like, I kept thinking about that. Like, what is that? I didn't know how to really take it. And then I started reading the story of Joseph. And then I saw myself in the text. And listen, I'm not saying that my setback was Joseph's setback, because how many of you know there are levels to setbacks? I'm not trying to compare what I went through in ministry with what Joseph went through his life. Okay, Joseph's like in a whole different galaxy than what I went through. But what I do know, though, is that there were seasons. I'm talking 4 years ago. I'm talking, 5 years ago, whatever. There were seasons when my wife and I sat in our living room. And she looked me in the eye and she's like, are we still supposed to do this thing? Because it don't feel like it. And I said to her, I'm like, I don't know. I said to her 4 years ago, I'm like, this is the least confident I've ever felt. I have no idea if I'm even supposed to be doing this. I don't know how to do this. This is hard. I don't want to do this. This is impossible. There were moments where I'm like, do we need to just book a flight to San Diego and be like, peace out, we are done. This is not me this is a real conversation. My wife's right there. She'll tell you. There were moments where I'm like, man, I don't know what to do. I'm ready to be done. But the grace of God empowered me to show up, not to do anything spectacular, but to just keep doing the same thing that I've been doing for 15, 20 years. It's just the same thing. She was right. I didn't do anything different. I just kept, okay, I don't know how it's gonna work out. Okay, I'm just gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna do the same exact, even when it was hard, I'm just gonna show up and do the same thing I want to do. I'm gonna show up. Even when I lost people. And the last thing I wanted to do was stand on this stage and preach a stupid sermon. I got on the stage and I did everything that God gave me the grace to do. I just kept doing the same thing. Joseph kept doing the same. Don't miss the point. I'm not telling you that because I think my story is that important. I'm telling you that because I think it's important for you to understand that your greatest threat to your comeback is not your setback. Listen to me. Listen, I'm almost done. I promise. The greatest threat to the comeback that God has planned for you is not your setback. No, the greatest threat to your comeback is stopping. The greatest threat to your comeback is if you stop doing everything that God has given you the grace to do. The greatest threat to the comeback that God was orchestrating for Joseph was if he were to stop being faithful and stop being excellent and stop pursuing God. That is your greatest threat. So please don't stop. I don't know what you're facing right now, but I got a word for somebody. Don't stop doing what God has given you the grace to do. I know it's hard. I know it's painful, but don't stop. Don't stop trusting Him. Don't stop believing. Don't stop showing up. Don't stop singing. Don't stop worshiping. Don't stop living with integrity. Don't stop choosing character. Don't stop doing the right things even when nobody sees it. Don't stop walking with Him even when you don't get credit. Don't stop trusting community. Don't stop going to your circle. Don't stop reading the Word of God. Don't stop repenting. Don't stop confessing your sins. Don't stop trusting God. Don't stop leaning on Him. It doesn't matter what the setback is. Don't stop doing what God will give you the grace to do in that season, because if you don't stop, God is going to use that very setback to not only give you a step up, but He's going to use it to set up your comeback. Can you imagine if Joseph would have stopped in the pit? Can you imagine if he would have stopped in the prison? Right? I mean, you know the ending. I just want to, if you read the story like you're reading it for the first time, I just want to go in chapter 37 and be like, don't stop. He's in the hole. Don't stop, bro. He's in prison. Don't stop. Don't stop, because you're going to miss the best part if you stop. Don't stop, because you're going to miss your comeback if you stop. Don't stop, Joseph, because God's going to use the setback to prepare you for an amazing comeback that you couldn't even see coming. Don't Stop. Can I show you the best part of the story? And then I'll let you guys go eat some apps after church. Check out the best part of the story. Genesis chapter 50. Again, please read this when you get home. Okay? So, because I'm kind of giving you a big overview. So Pharaoh makes Joseph second in command, right? God uses Joseph, this is amazing, to save the entire nation of Egypt. And then all of a sudden, Joseph's brothers, wherever they lived, there was a famine. And they needed food. And they came to Egypt. And they realized that their brother that they sold was now second in command. Oh, man. Oh, how the turntables. Listen to what the brothers said when they came in Genesis chapter 50. Listen to what they said to him, okay? So they came over to him. All right, his brothers then came, and he says that they threw themselves before him. And they're like, we're your slaves. I don't know what you guys would have done if you were Joseph, but you know what I would have done? It's just me. Like, I would have gotten all the guys that work for me now. I need you guys to dig the biggest hole you can dig, enough to fit 11 people. Fill it with water. Not enough to drown them, enough for them to be on the tippy toes and just, just throw them in there. And then get me that robe. And I'm going to sit top of the hole and eat a pizza. Joseph's a better man than me. They're like, we're your slaves, because they're like, oh man, we done messed up. And listen to what Joseph says. He says, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? This is how you know that God has worked in your heart in your setback. This is how you know that God has developed you in the dark place. When everybody else will be out for vengeance, God has shaped Joseph in the dark place to be a person of character. Joseph was self-aware. He was humble. It's like, I'm not in the place. I'm not God. You guys try to play God, but I'm not trying to play God. And then he said this, you intended to harm me, but God, somebody say, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Another translation says this, that what you intended for evil, God used for good. Don't get it twisted. The writer is not saying that God deliberately caused evil to Joseph. No, what he's saying is God deliberately redeemed the evil for good. He didn't deliberately cause it, but he deliberately said, I'm going to redeem it, and I'm going to use it for good. And I'm telling somebody today that God is saying, hey, I didn't deliberately cause that thing that happened to you, but if you let me, I'm going to redeem it. I'm going to redeem your addiction. I'm going to redeem your abuse. I'm going to redeem your trauma. I'm going to redeem your addiction. I don't know what setback you went through. I don't know what they did to you. I don't know what the enemy had planned. But if you trust me, I can redeem it. Joseph said, what you guys intended to harm me, I have a God who is going to redeem it for good. Y'all playing checkers. Joseph's like, my God's playing the most advanced game of chess the world has never known. You meant it for evil, to harm me. But God's like, man, I'm going to use it to save a whole lot of people. And if the story would have ended right there, it would have been worth the price of admission. Thank you very much. That is a great ending. But lucky for us, there is a scene after the credits. And if you heard the story of Joseph before, like I have, chances are the story ended right about here. For most of my life, this was the end of the story. And I listened to a sermon by a pastor from Elevation Church a year ago, and he's like, no, don't get up and leave. There's a scene after the credits, and it's the best part. Can I show it to you? This is so good. So Joseph says, hey, don't be afraid. I'm going to provide for you and your children. He reassured them. He spoke kindly to them. They couldn't speak kindly to him. He spoke kindly to them. And then listen to this part. It says, so Joseph stayed in Egypt along with his father's family. He lived 110 years. He saw the third generation. Ephraim was his child, of Ephraim's children. Also the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were placed at birth on Joseph's knees. The third generation. Here's the timeline again. You got some of you are like, what's the big deal? You should have ended with the first verse. Here, you ready for this? Joseph was 17 when they sold him into slavery. setback. He was about 30 when Pharaoh plucked him out of prison and made him his second in command. And a lot of historians believe that he was about 40 when he had this conversation with his brothers. You guys tracking? 17 sold into slavery. Setback, 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 setback. 30 catches a break. King plucks him out of prison. 40, he's having this conversation with his brothers. Fast forward 70 years after that, and his great-great-grandbabies are enjoying the benefits of what God set up with the setback he experienced when he was in his 20s. And I don't know this for sure, but I bet that if you went to Joseph when he was 110 with his great-great-grandbaby sitting on his lap in Egypt, enjoying the overflow of what God set up, I bet Joseph would tell you, I wouldn't wish what happened to me in my 20s on my worst enemy. But I also wouldn't take it back. I wouldn't take any of it back. Because yes, it was hard. Yes, it was brutal. Yes, it wasn't what I chose. But because of the God that I serve, I got 70 years in a foreign land. My great-great-great-grandchildren are living in the overflow of what God set up because of the setback that I experienced in my 20s. I'm preaching to somebody today. Do you have any idea what God can do through the setback you're facing in this season? So many of us are just like, God, can you get me out of here? And God's like, I'm thinking generations from here. If you let me, if you keep showing up, if you keep doing what I give you the grace to do, I promise you that your setback isn't just going to give you a step up. I promise you that I can use it to set up an ending that will blow your mind. Yeah, he had rough 20s, but 70 years in a foreign land, and his great-great-grandbaby sitting on his lap enjoying the fruits in Egypt. That's the God that we serve. And what I love about the story of Joseph is that the same thing happened with Jesus. The same thing happened. I don't know if you ever thought about it this way before, but the cross was a setback in Jesus' life. And we don't talk a lot about this, but there's a story in the Bible where Jesus didn't want to go to the cross. You know that? He's saying, God, is there another way? Because it was hard. It was a setback. But I don't know about you guys. I'm so glad that Jesus did not let the setback of the cross stop him from doing what God gave him the grace to do, because 2,000 years later, we are still living in the overflow of what God set up through the setback at Calvary. You have no idea. You have no idea what God is orchestrating. You have no idea what God is doing. You have no idea how this is going to play out. You have no idea how grand the future is that God has planned for you. He's saying, all I need you to do is to just trust me. A room this size, I know we're all in all kinds of different places. Some of us are in a setback. Some of us are out of it. Some of us are maybe going into it. I don't know where you are today, but I've been praying for you that God will meet you wherever you are. And I believe that regardless of where you are, I think the next step is the same for all of us. I think it's God saying, I just need you to trust me.